they are. Pew pew! Over the years, there's been a lot of them. Innovation in gameplay, controls, and more have been very interesting to examine. So for a full picture, go check out my little history lesson on the genre and maybe subscribe while you're at it. But today, let's do something rather purely for fun and rank every single one of the space sims. Let's make a tier list from the best, greatest examples to the most wretched, most backwards pieces of software that have been released for the space game category. But before we go on, there are some self-imposed rules. Number 1. The game has to be a space sim. For more information, do check out the history lesson there. Now, there might be one or two exceptions, but for a good reason. You'll see. Number 2. The space sim has to be a notable game. Think of a budget, cultural impact, any kind of innovation or whatever. Now yes, this is a subjective one, as is the tier list itself, so I'll just try to do my best and include as many titles as I can. Number 3. The game has to be released. No early access bullshit or whatever unfinished nonsense. But the rule number 2 takes priority over this rule. And that's it. Now, since a lot of games are older than me, and let's be frank, I don't have the time in the world to play every single one of them, some games will have to be judged on first impression basis with the at-the-time review support, with the cultural impact weight being the more prevalent metric. Now, I'll helpfully add a little mark like this to any title that I've not properly played, but still want to include for one or another reason. Alright, well then, if you're ready, well, remember to support my occasional silly videos on Patreon, subscribe and all that good stuff, and let's just jump in, shall we? Alright, so then starting off with the board itself. Starting with the special tier. This is where we put games that has had such a striking impact on the genre, molding it and establishing new standards or ways of doing things, that anyone not following their lead is doomed to fail. For example, the first FPS game that used the mouse look and WASD as control schemes. That kind of impact. These games might not be the best or even playable today, but they deserve the special recognition for the impact they've had for its peers. So, they will take the top. Then we have the great tier underneath. Now, being a highly critical asshole, I honestly will struggle to put any game in here, as the game truly has to be well made, with gameplay that sucks you in. And no, not in a time sink grind kind of a way. It also has to be fair, both in gameplay and in the way it sells itself to you. So literally any live service, microtransaction, pay-to-win, exploitative garbage is automatically out of the window. These are games that, while flawed, can be enjoyed without any buts. Then we have the good tier for everyone else. There is still something fun and interesting, but these games have some major flaws that prevent you from fully enjoying them. In middle we have mediocre. Games that, well, have no real impact and really serve as the middle ground. Sure, some might even be enjoyable and have some cool features, but either they are a collection of poorly executed features or fail to hit the mark due to lack of experience or incompetence or, well, maybe just budget. Either way, by no means these games are bad. Some might even have a certain charm, but end up being forgotten and blend into the crowd. Below that, we have the interesting tiers. While it is below mediocre, games in this tier could just as well be above it. Games here have one or more absolutely amazing or interesting features or approach to the gameplay that in another world or time would have been an S-tier worthy. Something really interesting or different that sets them apart, and while normally the game is, well, nothing special, these few things, be they mechanics or approach to game design or what have you, make them utterly distinct and, well, interesting. Below that, we have the crap tier. Yep, this is where the bad games go. And below that, we have the pure trash. Now, originally I wanted to call this tier anally festering maggot-infested hemorrhoid tier, but, that would have taken a bit too much space. Anyways, games here are so bad that they make me visibly ill. Something that they or their developers have done that utterly fucked even the small good bit of will that they got. The worst of the worst comes here. Alright, so the rules are done, the board is done. Well, like the history lesson, I'll gradually progress over the timeline from the oldest to the latest games. And we'll be starting this list off with the very first game that would be considered a space sim. This was the very first spaceship flying game that incorporated, well, you flying a spaceship across an open world and shooting at enemies, rather than having a typical space combat game that we're used to. You know, a small arena map with a bunch of planes and pew-pewing at each other. Space Raiders instead incorporated the open world and traveling between sectors. Now, when I looked into the history of the genre, it surprised me how ahead of, well, anything this game was, and how accurately it nailed the true space sim aspect. However, it is very old, very clunky, and the gameplay, well, is a single note. Yet, among its peers of the time, the game is still listed as one of the best. I mean, okay, yeah, it was 1980, so yeah. Now, for a predecessor that anyone barely even talks about today, I'm still inclined to be generous, so this is very special. At the time, video games looked like this. While Elite of 84 looked like this. Sure, while visually original Elite looked like backwards ass, the gameplay is where it shined above its peers. Design-wise, even for that time, it felt effortless and obvious. To blend the open world spaceship piloting with combat and trading. Thanks to hindsight especially, we can remark just how ahead of its time it really was. And no wonder it's the progenitor of the true space sims. When people talk about this niche genre, this is the title everyone always mentions, and not Star Raiders. That's how overshadowing it was. So, culturally, this has had a massive genre-defining role, and that alone puts it at a special tier. However, on technical scale, it too was amazing. To shove a massive open world with 8 galaxies, each with 256 planets in each one of them, in 32 kilobytes of memory is honestly just astounding. However, only old and mostly British play this game nowadays. In fact, if you want to give it a try, there is a browser version available free to play. Now, controls suck ass, and maybe it was partly due to the tech at the time, but Jesus fucking Christ, it's unplayable. Seriously, why did they think to put controls in the places they did, even for the keyboards of the time? Fuck me! Similar to Elite, but with more colors, 5 years later you get a Space Rogue. At the time reviewed well and basically mimicking Elite, even beating it in a few places, but now in the retrospect, like the Star Raiders, it's simply overshadowed by Elite again. Basically, it just didn't do enough to feel different, and felt like merely copying Elite and nothing more. So, good tier it is. Now, with visuals like nowhere else, using colors, art, hell, even cutscenes and story writing, Wing Commander, well, gameplay-wise was nothing but just space planes doing pew-pew at each other, and a rather obvious step back from the gameplay innovation, it still exceeded thanks to its presentation. While Elite was the progenitor of true space sims, Wing Commander solidified space combat game subtype of the space sims with ease. Now, there's a lot of positives I could mention about the game, and while I mark this as having not played like Elite 84, I've touched both. Hated the prehistoric controls and left it at that, but I have tried them. Still, they deserve special tier, no question.
A tiger's claw tried to attack us here at Katithrak Mang, but my stealth fight has destroyed it, and soon we will demolish the rest of their fleet.
Speak of your plans, not of your toys.
But I know the destruction of the Tiger's Claw was your fault, and I still believe that you're guilty of treason.
Then we have the Wing Commander sequel. The same good stuff, no obvious drawbacks, so it's a shoo-in for a great. Mr. Braben breaks out on his own and creates this, a questionable follow-up to original Elite with even more questionable name. Regardless, this game featured full Newtonian physics, basically as you continuously accelerate as you're going forward. Now, this is where people learn that, yeah, it's cool as an idea, but oh no, it's really bad for these games. Also, the game featured seamless planetary landings in the year 93. Even today, it's a massive surprise when a space game allows you to manually pilot and land on a planet. Starfield? Again, with the technical mastery, the game stands out. I mean, it was one of the rare full 3D games after all. But when it comes to the gameplay, well, there's a reason not many people really remember this one. It was a lot slower, in part thanks to the Newtonian physics, but visually it also failed to compete with more artful games, even in its genre. And of course, the controls once more are fucked. So, good tier, but mainly thanks to the technical stuff.
Have located a rebel fleet orbiting the planet Torcana.
Excellent. Prepare the attack. We're attacked by Imperial Star Destroyers. Begin evasive maneuvers.
With the Star Wars hype a full decade ago, now only in '93 we get the game that truly immerses you into the world of Star Wars. Now, trust me, there were games with that license before. Most of them were really shit. And the same thing goes with Star Trek 2, so I'm not gonna pollute the crap tier, okay? However, X-Wing was basically like Wing Commander, exactly the same looking, with maybe a bit more details and graphics, but you were just still pew-pewing at things and looking at cutscenes and not much more. And yet, to this day, arguably this and its sequel get remembered a lot more than Wing Commander, probably in no small part thanks to the Star Wars license, but also due to, well, at the time at least, great gameplay. So, great tier, no question.
Sorry, boys, I'm just a tourist with a frag nav console.
Same year, Wing Commander shits out another game. While this is the first true space sim in Wing Commander series, as in combat and trading, it also lacks the stylized flair and that Chris Roberts bullshittery of the time to make it great. It was okay, hell even good, but got easily outshined by X-Wing. So, good tier it is.
Primary objectives completed.
And the hits don't stop coming for Star Wars, a better in all aspects, arguably also a lot more remembered space combat game that TIE Fighter was X-Wing, but just better. If X-Wing competed with Wing Commander, then TIE Fighter, especially in retrospect, buried it. But it is not the first one and thus not really that special. Still, it's great nevertheless.
A puny contingent of their soldiers has been captured.
Peace. Have we ever known anything like that, Paladin?
And Sally.
It warms my heart to see you again, Colonel, but I must excuse myself now, as your duty here takes precedence over our catching up.
Chris Roberts is back and he's more pompous than ever. Full motion videos for cutscenes. Mark Hamill, production value. That game tried its fucking hardest to be a goddamn movie before games even tried to shifting to cinematic approach. Now, there is a lot you could say about Mr. Roberts and his attempts at the time especially, as well as what followed, but for the time the game was a massive hit, beating both Star Wars games in sales. This felt like the culmination of Mr. Roberts' creative vision, with hit after hit after hit, though the game again was really nothing more than just a space pew-pew combat only. It still certainly is very special, thanks to the story and those cutscenes. 30 years ago. Holy crap, I feel old. Anyways, Microsoft, alongside its ongoing flight simulators, decided to publish a space simulator as well. While this is not the first space flight simulator, the third subtype of the space sims, this certainly is the most respected of it. See, a few games came and went helping, well, I would like to say no one, but that's not exactly true. Computers simply were too slow to properly simulate all the important aspects of space flight, physics and rocket science to be of really any use in games market at least. Still, one of the first space simulators has to be remarked for its good looks and attempt. It's certainly a very interesting piece of history that would inform the future hardcore simulators. back to UK. Braben creates his own company, the Frontier Developments, and farts out, well, more or less a copy of Elite 2, but with even less catchy and more confusing name. Seriously, what the fuck was Braben thinking with this naming scheme? Anyways, more textures, more technical stuff. First encounters still offer the Newtonian physics, and at that point, let me quote Computer Game Review by Tassos Kaifas. If another Elite is planned for the future, this baby should be thrown out the window with the bathwater. Oh, you know what? I miss those old written game reviews when they actually reviewed games, unlike today when they just simply describe what you do in a game. Fucking Christ. Anyways, the most I can give this game is interesting, and I'm being charitable.
Hey, we really thought you'd had it that time. If you call in when I come off duty, I'll buy you a drink.
Fucking Christ.
So much for staying hypersonic.
Accident. How?
We'll deal with that later. Our first job is to get you back on your feet.
While Chris Roberts was splooging all over everyone's screen, his brother seems to be more into technical stuff. Privateer 2, dropping the Wing Commander name from its name, is another true space sim with combat and trading. Lower scale but still very good FMVs for cutscenes only go so far, as the game, well, was not to the usual standard of Wing Commander games, leading to mild thumbs up at best. And so, we got our first mediocre game.
Well, I'd call that a successful test. Let's go.
Till we meet again.
Of course, I would have backed you up if you tried anything.
One card draw for the next drink.
Better luck next
So,
time.
how do you follow up your amazing, bombastic, cumulative, performative wank on everyone's screens? Well, Mr. Roberts decided to phone it in and do basically more of the same. While FMVs are good, the gameplay and the code remained about the same. No gameplay innovations, just the same pew-pew. Cutscene, more pew-pew, cutscene. This is what the mediocrity and stagnation looks like, even if on the surface it looks high quality. This was also the end of the space game golden age, and you could definitely feel it.
Computer, take a memo to Admiral Henson, Navy Headquarters for FTL transmission. Furthermore, I must register my...
We're getting a coded transmission on a secure channel.
You should attempt a salvage operation. You should then pilot the vessel into the field.
With a lower quality but interesting design, iWar, or Independence War, is one of those titles that someone always brings up when a whippersnapper like me talks about the history of the games. Taking a slower paced space combat gameplay design, iWar is more notable for releasing at a time when space sims were going out the door and more active types of games were taking their place. This was the start of the space sim dark ages. As for the game itself, well, it focused more on the hardcore space combat, contrary to the arcade fest of Wing Commander and Star Wars, but not as stupidly realistic as Elite 2 or 3. Still, the game certainly is interesting.
Аргус. Настоящее время.
Паркан H-15 вызывает Аргус Пелинг. Прошу стыковку с базовым порталом.
Parkan, or Parkan the Imperial Chronicles, is a very interesting game. Not only because it's a rare non-American, European or Japanese game, but of all places it hails from the post-Soviet Russia, where the game development is as rare as homosexuals on the streets for them. After investigating history of space sims, this title jumped out like no other at the time. Yes, it looks kinda subpar, even for the time, and the gameplay, well yes, it's a true space sim with combat and trading. What really truly set Parkan apart was three things. Number one, like Elite 2, you could land on a planet, though it is done through a cutscene. Oh, hey, Starfield! Number 2, the two things that other space sims did not manage to do at the time was combining the first-person shooter with the space sim. Yep, it did that too. See, for today, true space sims are pretty much unimaginable without being able to get off your pilot's seat and walking aboard your own ship or outside of it. This was the big shift in early 2000s for the genre, but here is Parkan 15 years ahead, combining it in an immersive way, these two genre types. And number 3, this also was the first space sim that allowed you to dock with other ships and walk aboard them, stealing anything that's not nailed down and killing the crew. Trust when I say, Parkan almost predicted where the true space sims would go for the next golden age of the genre, at the tail end of the first one. But as for the game, aside from those few aspects, well, the game is monotone but playable, still with the shit controls. Now, if only it was noticed by more people, it would probably be a shoo-in for S tier. But as is, it's interesting for sure, and almost good, but alas, game didn't take off, which is very sad.
During the reign of the Ancient Ones.
Casey, my man, billions of confed credits at work.
Looks like the cats had one hell of a party. Too bad we missed it.
None of the robots took part in this one, and you could tell. Sure, some of the aspects looked mildly better, but FMEs and other aspects oozed blandness, even compared to Wing Commander 4. Mediocre!
Taking heavy damage! Requesting immediate fighter cover and rescue!
Who came out of nowhere, pilot?
I don't know!
Sir, should we assist?
A full 3D environment with modern feeling HUD. The game stood apart from other space combat games by combining better elements of them, while skipping the FMV and cutscene budget. Now, in sales, it did pretty well. Reception was positive, but, well, everyone noted that, well, this was nothing revolutionary or really exceptional. Remember, this was the year Half-Life released. And then you have gameplay like this. Mediocre!
"32 years have passed since the Great War. We forge a new alliance to guard the tomb of space."
Funnily enough, the developer of Freespace also beforehand released Descent series. These are all about the same types of games in the same sort of league, so I simply decided to highlight Freespace as the better versions. As for the sequel, Freespace 2, a very similar looking game with slightly updated visuals. Wikipedia even mentions that, oh, the game received numerous Game of the Year awards and high praise from critics, which, true, the game series sets itself apart from the 2D space combat games like Wing Commander with that full 3D and cool effects. The story was also praised for its progression and conclusion depending on your actions, but in retrospect, well, it loses some visual flair from the 2D games, where now you are just floating camera with pew-pew sticking out of you whenever you shoot, and that's it. Now, of course, I won't dismiss the extra mechanical effort put in piloting and combat. In that regard, the full 3D environment felt far better than the 2D ones or even the first gen 3D. Even so, with better games coming out, Freespace only lingers in the annals of history like the War, and I only hear about these games from the people who lived with it. And of course, it doesn't help that at the time my standards were raised by Half-Life. So sadly, I have to put Freespace 2 in mediocre.
For many years, research was undertaken, until man's ingenuity created jump gates. Adverse planetary conditions, difficult terrain, and the shipping of materials made building difficult and very expensive. The terraformers began to develop their own intelligence.
And so we start the story of the German Egosoft and the X series. By now, well and truly, space games, especially the space sims, were a thing of the past, and only weirdos stuck with it in the time when both interest and funding was drying up. So then, X1. After 5 years of silence, a new true space sim releases. On the first glance, you have a 3D ship cockpit. Okay, that's good. Then you have animated characters. Whenever they appear on the screen, they look like utter garbage. And that's good! Like, no, seriously, the janky, ugly-looking late 90s 3D characters, they are the kind of so bad this is good. I love to see it in all games. Well, they have a charm, shall we say. However, what was not so charming was, well, pretty much everything else. Yes, in X-series fashion, and unlike nearly all space sims of the time, Eagersoft focused on trading first, while combat was secondary. As for traveling, movement, controls, well, even menus, the game was criticized quite a bit for. Hell, looking at Freespace will tell you that right away. But unlike Freespace, X1 did more. Still, Eagersoft would almost single-handedly keep the whole true space sim genre alive for the next 10 years, and this is where it started. So, while it's not good, it's also not mediocre. It's certainly interesting, for sure. Space flight simulators. What a subgenre it is. Now, the first version of Orbiter, attempting full realistic space flight simulations, was released in 2000 by a single man, Dr. Martin Schweiger. Today, however, it's been renamed to Orbiter 2016, and you can find it free of charge with open source project on GitHub. And this is where my utter lack of competence leaves me. I really have no idea how to really judge a project like this, but if there is one thing I'm certain, it is important. This truly trails a line of video game / pure testing learning equipment, basically. But for the sake of better future, we must not forget and indeed remark on these projects. So it is something truly interesting.
Commander Romanov,
commence the attack.
Da, Admiral.
What the hell? Mayday! He's in the trap! I'm taking fire! I repeat!
My name is Squadron Leader Maria Enriquez. Okay, people.
Now, ever wonder what the fuck happened with the other robots? Well, Chris was splooging all over our screens in the 90s and then accidentally let out a fart that wasn't really a fart? Well, Aaron was working on Starlancer. Out were the old FMVs and in were the new fancy pre-rendered cutscenes that looked like ass and sounded like this.
All primary objectives have been accomplished. Secondary objectives are now being targeted on all fronts.
Admiral Kulov, your strategy is working perfectly.
I love them. The janky early 2000s camp and crap graphics. There's just something utterly disgusting and welcoming about it. With a full 3D cockpit and 3D environments, somehow I'm still remembering Freespace having more and better effects. Well, no wonder commercially it was a fuck up. Even looking at the bombast of the old FMV games, this felt tame and toned down. It's not crap exactly, but it barely scrapes by on the mediocre as well.
It is the 26th century. Peace prevails in the Earth's solar system, but there is trouble on the fringe of civilized space.
Is in need of a contract pilot to escort the freighter Hesperides.
This is Logan reporting for duty.
While a lower quality looking game than Starlancer, Tachyon The Fringe had less crowded menus. And while gameplay, well, actually, come to think of it, that also was lower quality. Still, the game did offer a few interesting things like power distribution and decoupled / flight assist mode, where basically you are free floating, quote unquote, sliding and being able to shoot in any direction. It was just meh. You get your pick of missions and accomplish them whatever way you want, but beyond that, it's just a few mild features and it's just yet another space combat game with nothing of note. So, no wonder space in popularity was rock bottoming at the time, and sales of this game only further declined. Mediocre!
Hey, watch it!
Sorry, Cal, must be getting old.
Oh god, the early 2000s cinematics. Gotta love the garbageness. Jesus. Overall, the game is yet another space combat game with nothing special adorning it. Visually, it's more interesting than most other full 3D games, but that's about it. Funnily enough, the game was received quite well, but failed in sales, leading up to developer being bought out by another studio and renamed, which later made them make the Bionicle game. I shit you not. Well, anyways.
So it's gonna be like this. We're going to portal through.
Dominix.
Shit, all damps on the damnation. Scepters!
Ah boy, yeah. EVE Online, right, yeah, we've come to this. On a technical scale, EVE Online, well, it's not really a space sim. While yes, you do pilot a spaceship and do all manner of sheepy things, somehow the game is more closer to a general space genre than the space sims. Still, I choose to include it cause, you know, why not? Besides, you'll probably yell at me if I didn't include it, so here we go. The story of EVE Online is so varied and vast, like World of Warcraft's success, massive player economies, guilds, record-breaking titles, battles, and even pay-to-win that would put fucking Star Citizen in its place.
Know your fucking place, trash!
To even failed games, projects, and much, much more. If there's a fuck-up, EVE Online has done it. If there's a player event, EVE Online probably has a record in it. By the sheer bloat and lard, EVE Online takes the place in special tier. But even so, when it comes to trading gameplay, of space games at least, EVE Online is only matched by X series. But that's only in single player, but EVE is MMO after all. And in that, well, it's unbeaten and teaches everyone a lesson. Or maybe 20.
Well, the only thing I'm looking for right now is this drink.
Red alert! The Donau is hit. Launch all rescue and defensive units. All other fighters...
If Wing Commander 4 was a fart, then Freelancer was the jet diarrhea that bore a hole straight through the Chris's pants and propelled him off the stage. Money embezzling for the fucking Wing Commander movie, delays upon delays, and much more. Culminating in Microsoft just booting the fucking robots out and biting the bullet by releasing whatever was finished. That was Freelancer in a nutshell. The game was hyped to high hell, as this was the dream that Roberts wanted to make, promising, well, actually come to think of it, very similar shit that he is doing with Star Citizen today. But back in 2000s. Yeah, no. Well, result was that the game was still liked by the public, surprisingly so, even spawning some capable mods, and people who won't shut the fuck up about them every time I mention these old games. Okay, fine, I'll play it one of these days, you happy? The game was a disaster, and it's a miracle that anything worthwhile came out of the project. And personally speaking, this is an extremely cautionary tale that we must not forget, especially when Star Citizen is glacially inching its way towards any kind of a state that could be considered finished. But as for the Freelancer, well, it is a mediocre game as is at best, but add the behind the scenes information and it easily becomes a pure trash game. However, it's also a cautionary tale, and thus, well, we kinda need to put it in interesting, but for all the wrong reasons.
Okay, here we go.
Immediately. You can fill in a formal complaint if you...
I'm Bandana of the Argon Intelligence Service.
Speaking of trash, X2 was not. Visually improving quite a bit, at least in the art cohesion. Gameplay getting better, but still a nothing burger. This was a game for the fans of the space sim genre, and that alone. Unlike X1, it's better, sure, but it's also less special. The same year Half-Life 2 released, we get a fan-made recreation of original Elite, with modern programming and graphics, by the fans, for fans. Oh, and also, did I mention that it's open source? Reason this half-baked jumble of questionable coding is notable is obvious. It is a working game and it is still updated today, sure, mostly by mods, but that's the beauty of this project. It's just a fan frustration with David Braben and his wet farts of games that made them pissed off enough to recreate the original true space sim that started it all. And you know, it's also rather shocking how close to Elite Dangerous, the true sequel of Elite, this Oolite ended up being. Like Orbiter, this is a special project that has no commercial motivation. It's just pure spite and dedication from the fanbase to create something that would be a true successor of one of the best. There is no question that this is something unique and utterly special. Though the controls are still shit.
Welcome to the special edition of Argon Today. In this program, we look at the Koch War.
Just hope your father recovers soon to give us some insight into the Koch.
Gate, home of light.
And so, Egosoft is back at it again. This was a truly grim time for space sims, but with X3 fans of the genre and the developer would get delighted by a bunch of games named X3. I guess no one told Egosoft how expansions worked. Oh well. As for the game itself, well, the game got upgrades everywhere. Economy, combat, graphics, and even story. But let's be frank, no one plays X games for story, do they? Well, for nerds, the game got more complicated. Needlessly so, and the UI did not help it either. We're back at floating camera UI, stagnating visuals, where even Freespace in '99 had better effects, or at least more noticeable ones. Actually, come to think of it, god damn it, no wonder people reference Freespace so often. From that point onward, space sims barely had improved. Anyways, X3 still kept on chugging along at the time when no one else was doing literally anything, and for the next 7 or so years, this would be the latest, highest profile title in the genre. Even so, sadly, it's not good, nor is it interesting.
Organizing onboard computer with port.
So here's a weird one, an MMO space flight simulator. Rise the Vieneo province? Originally with a 14-day trial period and the subscription payment model, this game, it's interesting. Yeah, I really don't know what to think about it. It's just interesting. Skipping 5 years of nothing but shovelware, crap space combat arcade trash that would fill the crap tier to no end, the next most notable game arose just before the big resurgence of space sims. It was none other than Kerbal Space Program 1. It introduced these cartoony characters, but with hardcore rocket physics underneath, that was accessible for pretty much everyone. This would become the de facto space flight simulator to this day. Now, well, yes, of course, Orbiter tried. It lacked any appeal for the little Jenny, the 5-year-old, to learn about the space and how rocket science worked. Kerbal, on the other hand, tossed in a few cartoons and let you explode them in any gruesome way possible. And the little Jenny was hooked, the little monster. But on a serious note, Kerbal has had such a massive impact on not just games in the genre, but also careers of actual engineers and scientists. It has the same sort of a case of, well, I have 1,000 hours in Microsoft Flight Simulator, so I can pilot this plane easily, and I got hired. With Kerbal as well. Even setting aside the hard science and physics, it's just fun, and so well done to appeal to pretty much anyone that it surprises me that it took this long for hardcore simulators to realize. Now, Kerbal is the kind of a game that is just once in a lifetime, and we must cherish and sing praises of. See, the game wasn't exactly made with monetization in mind, just as a fun project that hit the nail. Well, eventually. Yes, that's right, it's also one of those rare success stories of early access, you know, asking money up front for, well, undeveloped thing, and then actually finishing development eventually, releasing a full game. See, Kerbal is nothing but special, and we must remember that. Like Faster Than Light a year later, StarSector is barely a space game really, but it's just so fucking good and focuses on spaceships as well that once more, I would be probably crucified if I didn't mention it or include it. Now, while I do mark it as a game I haven't played, well, I haven't done much, not enough to at least call it fair, but the videos and the little gameplay I've done has entertained me thoroughly. And while it is less influential than FTL, in similar vein, it transcends genres and deserves the S tier spot for a lot of little things, and most notably the game design.
Chris Roberts.
Good morning, everyone.
And so we come to the exception of the rule number 3, finished games. Star Citizen. Not including this behemoth would only do the disservice to the list. The reason being that in 2012, when Chris Roberts, after a decade of his extrusion out of Hollywood and gaming industry, returns in a big way, announcing this super game called Star Citizen, a multiplayer, and Squadron 42, a single-player mega movie game akin to Wing Commander 3 and 4, but you know, so much better! The hype was real, so real that through crowdfunding alone, Mr. Roberts would be set to make a game a reality in the first week of funding alone. Now, while Star Citizen in 2012 was not alone, it certainly was the main catalyst that rejuvenated interest in space sims as a whole. In big part, thanks to Star Citizen's mega hype, we got people once more looking into these types of games, and old developers coming out of the woodwork to release their takes on the spacey, shippy, pew-pew games. This sort of impact alone qualifies Star Citizen to take the spot in S tier. However, it's still not finished, 12 years after its announcement and 10 years after its first alpha release, with over $700 million motherfucking dollars. What Star Citizen has produced, well, can't really be even called a game. Unless of course your standards and self-respect as a customer and fan of video games is lower than fucking dinosaur bones. While Squadron 42 is relatively close to the release, we are still waiting on that as well, without any kind of a release date either. Still, the point that I simply can't ignore is simple. There's nothing but hype, money and hope that props up this project, at least for now. I mean, sure, one could draw parallels between Star Citizen and Freelancer, but who knows, maybe Mr. Roberts will actually not weasel out and actually finish something. Who knows? But as is, Star Citizen is an atrocious quality, has been for the past 8 years since I've been covering it. It doesn't help that whatever game there could be is already infested morbidly with pay to win, barely started design and features. And you know, I think Pirate Software put it quite poignantly.
This is why I won't be playing Star Citizen. It is not because the game doesn't have promise, because it does. It's because of this. This is gross, dude. It's gross to me. It's not about greed, it's gross. To me, this is predatory, and it's something that I don't want to see in our industry, so it makes me not want to engage.
But still, you can't ignore the truly interesting and inspired videos, maybe even some promises and hell, even some executed features within the playable space. The developer CIG is showing that it's not just the Peter Molyneux style bullshit hype. And yet, thanks to the overwhelming bad shit like the whale hunting, exploitation, the FOMO and all the other nonsense, this just aches to be pure trash. And hey, maybe it will turn into that once we see the conclusion of Star Citizen or Squadron 42 when they release as actual games, being, oversold garbage that barely works. Or hell, maybe company just simply goes bankrupt and leaves the Freelancer-like corpse behind and nothing more. But on the other hand, you never know, maybe Star Citizen and Squadron will release and are actually mildly positive finished games. But at that point they will set the precedent that hey, exploiting your passionate fanbase like this is the way to make a game like this. But until that point, for now, Star Citizen does deserve recognition as a special tier placement. However, this is a very temporary thing until Chris Roberts either fulfills his promises for this game or fucks off again. Until then, I'll be watching. A free-to-play MMO space combat game by a Russian company. Yeah, that's pretty much the only way I can think of describing it, as there is really nothing remarkable I can mention about it, aside from the fact that it's still alive. What a year for space games it was. Faster than light. Even though not a space sim, hell, it can even be called a space game at all, it does focus on one of the more crucial aspects of the space sims, the spaceships themselves. This tiny little game has been extremely influential for the genre, and thus I feel it must be included for the sheer impact and inspiration it has had. Not to mention that it's a great fucking game on its own. S tier, no question. Ah yes, Space Engineers, the rare voxel-based game even today. It started its life just like Kerbal, being an early access title, but within 5 years or so, Keensoft actually announced it to be finally finished. Though it's not really a space sim, I feel I better include it cause, you people will yell at me in the comments if I don't. Yeah, but setting that aside, the game has shitty UI and really bad tutorial, but the things you can accomplish when everything is destructible is remarkable, to say the least. Sure, the game still looks like an early 2000s throwback, but there's nothing quite like this game on the market. Though with flaws, there is nothing exploitative about it. Sure, developers have released some good, some bad updates, but always with care and focus on the game itself. It's just a good game by good developers.
Hey, is someone there? I need help.
Yes, I hear you.
Thanks.
How'd you end up in that pod?
I was attacked in the highway.
There are some components around here I could use. Look around for them while I get set up.
I'll leave you boys to it.
Speaking of good developers and good games, Rebirth was not one of those. With Star Citizen and Elite Dangerous's bombastic entry rejuvenating the space sim with a new golden age, what Egosoft decided to do was to be the first on the market and provide the hungry masses with Afterbirth. Yep, that's how everyone called Rebirth, after it was clear that better graphics only go so far before incredible repetition and monotone, downright stagnating implementation and coding has been shoved in your face. Shit animations, shit interactions, NPCs that make Daggerfall look like a gem and not prehistoric footnote. Afterbirth was panned by everyone, critic and fan alike. It's now become an in-joke within the company that Afterbirth doesn't even exist, and it might as well. This is a truly crap game.
War. Pain. Destruction. But my son deserves a better future.
Adrian, head for planet Trinity.
Oh god, Starpoint Gemini, right. So, I have this utter love and hate with the third installment in the series because of just the character writing is nothing but verbal diarrhea by the British. But the developers are Croatian, regardless. Basically put, this game series is a smaller developer's attempt at a true space sim. But goddammit, did the third game piss me off. Anyways, still, even though critics reviewed the game above average, I'm not so easily pleased. Still, I respect Little Green Men, the developers of the game, for actually putting in their efforts, but unlike the X series, Starpoint, well, simply lacks its niche focus and blends into the background so quickly. Elite Dangerous, the first true space sim game I ever played. The game that propelled my ass into being self-employed layabout making shitposts like these, for example. How do I even judge a game like this, See, Elite Dangerous was the other half of the space sim resurgence alongside Star Citizen in early 2010s. Both of the project Kickstarter campaigns were launched around the same time, and there was even a rumor that Roberts went to Braben to pitch Star Citizen first. Well, whether or not that's true or not, if Star Citizen at the time was the hype man, Elite Dangerous actually delivered a really depthful, complex, yet modern and intriguing game with loads of playstyles, open galaxy, and much, much more. And to a certain degree, you could say that Elite Dangerous truly was the perfect space sim. Or at least the closest we got. Design-wise though, well, it employed a lot of repetitive tasks. Grinding basically became mandatory, and story, well, it was non-existent, and still to this day really is. In time, the developer kept adding more features that often were either game-breaking, horribly balanced or designed, or barely even worth the mention due to the pointless gameplay or function associated with it, culminating in the most recent massive increase in FOMO marketing and pay to win. On the other hand, there were a couple of features that genuinely expanded the gameplay too, but it rarely ever came with a positive outlook. See, I've criticized Elite for all of its faults, and the longer the time went on, this S-tier worthy title that competed with Star Citizen for the best space sim on the market, well, it started cramming more badly executed features that in retrospect nearly always went downhill, ever since the launch of 2014. And you know what? If nothing got added to Elite Dangerous since 2014, especially if it had offline mode, well, it would probably remain S-tier no problem. But it didn't. Especially the last 5 years have been utterly heartbreaking for me to see. And sure, yes, the base game is still good, there is no question about it. Sadly, thanks to the truly bad handling, releases and changes in focus, you know, the pay to win, just to rinse as much money out of leftover fans as possible, just to boost the profits of the whole company and nothing else, certainly not the game's benefit, has soured the taste drastically. And so, looking at Elite Dangerous is like watching someone craft an amazing wooden table. Sure, it creaks in a few places, maybe one of the legs is a bit too long, but it's mesmerizing. Then, over the years, watching the maker come back with the sandpaper and then scuff the finish, accidentally drop a hammer or two onto it, then letting some kid use drill bits on it, and finally taking a big shit on it, and calling it performative art. And so the score is only waning in my eyes, and that is just sad and a shame to see.
There's an old Korean saying, you can't put a price on honor. Well, maybe the offer was just too low.
In the background, a small, rather funky looking game by the name of Rebel Galaxy pops up, and it's a surprise hit, or at least garners a cult following, thanks to interesting characters, focused stories with cheeky character dialogue, and a certain, I guess, lovable asshole-ish nature about it. Though primarily a space combat game, it does feature additional types of gameplay, kind of. Still, it's pretty fun, and despite not being able to go up or down in a 3D space, it still feels more spaceshipy than quite a few of the mediocre tier games. A solid, good entry, for sure.
Commencing Atlas system suit initialization. User initialization sequence complete.
Oh gods, looking at the hype surrounding No Man's Sky before the launch was, well, in some part akin to Star Citizen's hype. Yet the negative backlash after the launch, when everyone realized just how many lies, implicit as bullshit and more were shoved out of Sean Murray's mouth, was just, palpable. This alone would have put No Man's Sky in the pure trash category, for good. And to many people it still is. However, in part thanks to internet historian making compelling case for redemption, and the developers doing what literally no developer has done before, you know, shutting the fuck up, hunkering down and releasing quality of life updates, content, and, well, fulfilling those promises made before. Now, Hello Games actually redeemed themselves. Going not only a step but a marathon above, they still kept on releasing more updates with more content, all of it without ever asking for more money, not releasing any kind of expansion, DLC, microtransactions, loot boxes, or pay to win. At this point, honestly, I struggle to believe that No Man's Sky actually is profitable by simply selling a game, a base game at that, but it seems they are. These realities alone put any developer to shame. You can make a great game, even after shitting the bed so hard you bore a hole straight through the china. But what about the game itself? Well, it's a kiddie cartoon, arcadey assault on your eyes. Well, at least that's what most hardcore space dads would say. You know, the ones who would spend thousands of dollars on space JPEGs, or on immersion sticks and scoff at the game like this. However, thanks to No Man's Sky, a greater audience has a gateway into space sim genre. More than that, on a technical scale, there are a few cool aspects as well, like proc-gen planets as well as the universe and the voxel terrain. Now, even in the sense of furthering the space sim genre itself, thanks to No Man's Sky alongside Elite Dangerous, these two games solidified that exploration now has to be the third main gameplay type alongside combat and trading for true space sims. Though it is kiddie and cartoony, No Man's Sky has gone through hell and back and has to be respected in more than just one way. It crawled its way, bit by bit, to the S tier, and deservedly so, stands along the greats. So how about a complete iceberg of a series? Evochron and Star Wraith, a series of true space sims with combat and trading that oddly has been flying under the radar for a lot of people, including myself. While the game has some rough UI designs and gameplay is nothing too much out of the ordinary, I see the Star Raiders' sector-based influence here. Besides that, I honestly could find very little about the developers or the game beyond just some basic information. Yet the game seems solid enough. Hold on, okay, according to the homepage, this is a solo developer effort. Holy shit, these games are a true passion project. I can't but just to love this. Still, there is a reason why these games never really took off in the mainstream, so let's go with interesting tier, for sure. Speaking of treasures, what happens when you decide to take FTL and put it in 3D space? Well, a genuinely cool game comes out. Everspace, an arcadey roguelike combat game that mimics a lot of FTL's gameplay, makes for a really fun and replayable game, for sure. Sure, it is repetitive, but it does nothing wrong and even excels visually. Now, if only it had a bit more meat on its bones like FTL, it would be great, but as is, I struggle to leave it in good tier. Space combat, trading and survival. Avorion's gimmick for true space sim niche is being able to build your own spaceship. While it's not a huge improvement, it's got its place. And so does the game. It's certainly got something going on, and while I wouldn't quite call it good, it's interesting, for sure.
Elite Vanguard.
Alright, so here's a second attempt at the second space sim golden age by Egosoft. After the utter failure that was the Afterbirth, X4 went hardcore. Hardcore menu simulator. Oh jeez. Still, as I recently covered, X4 has released update after update with expansions to supplement the income without exploitative bullshit, and guess what? People liked it. It's one of those rare games that steadily, like clockwork, increases its active player counts, and why not? It's a good game. I mean, okay, sure, it has still bullshit controls and UI designed by a fucking accountant, but it also has the best market simulation of all the space sims that rival even EVE's Online's. But I guess that's kind of a different market. Well, anyways, X4, while mediocre as fuck at first glance, has the depth to satisfy the niche's itch. It's easily a good game, but to reach the greatness, well, there's a lot to do yet, and it's surprisingly simple stuff like simpler controls, better UI, also better graphics, and maybe better animations, and definitely voice acting. Oh boy. So a little while back I did touch on this weird little game. While it's kinda hard to call it a space sim or even a space game, it's rather interesting in its approach to a spaceship-based game. And you know, that's exactly perfectly where it should fit. Sadly, though, the game is abandoned. Or maybe you could call it finished. Potato potato. So how about a good-looking, cohesive, slow and methodical space trading game? Yep, that's the Helium Rain. I stumbled across this game some time ago and there's literally nothing bad about it. Fuck, it's free to play without any monetization at all. Yes, I don't even think the developers are making any money out of it. So yeah, these French developers also released another game 2 years ago, also completely for free. What is this? Supposed to be like some sort of an anti-capitalist performance art? That's, you know, actually cool and fun? Well, as it looks like, it's just a fun, off-the-clock sort of a project for the developer. And how can you dislike anything about that? Seriously, the lowest I can give this is the good tier rating. And now, onto something truly wretched. Hellion. So, the premise of the game was hardcore simulator with FPS gameplay and whatever the fuck else, you know, the super physics and blah. While the premise and first releases were, you know, somewhat promising, if mediocre, what happened next was truly dismal. Yes, this is one of those early access titles, but what makes it stand out is that it died. It died while promising to be finished and all that bullshit. But you see, developers just took the money and not just failed to deliver the game, but siphoned the funding to some other game, and then fucked off. No refunds, just go get fucked. That was Hellion. Now, I'd be happy if I'm completely wrong on this one, but as far as I know, that's what happened. Still, the thing is, the game is removed from storefront, obviously, but you can still read the reviews on it, and those are some abysmal ones. So, deservedly so, this is pure trash. A case in point on why I did not include any early access game, with the exception of very notable ones. Because most of those fuckers would end up sitting in this tier.
After our last game, we heard from a lot of humans that were a little salty that they couldn't fly up or down. What a bunch of bull.
Back in 2020, there were 3 interesting space games releasing, all of which turned out to be pretty good. The main focus for me was the sequel of Rebel Galaxy. The Outlaws immediately grabbed me thanks to once more their cheeky, lovable asshole tone, and more than that, utterly amazing music choice. Seriously, when I first opened the game, I just sat there, listening to songs. Their execution quality and everything just was amazing. How could a small game indie one like that could afford something so jaw-dropping? Still to this day, it's really a mystery to me. And the good hits kept on coming. The game, even though was still a space combat game at heart, attempted to branch out into trading as well. On a technical scale, I guess it is a true space sim, but it definitely doesn't feel like one. It's still a combat game at its heart, really. Still, cool characters, easy to follow story, simpler and hyper-arcadey gameplay that finally gives you the 6 degrees of freedom and the first-person cockpit perspective. And then there's the best spaceship painting Photoshop level editor I've seen in my whole life. As it happens, I inquired about this. Developers stated that they basically made the software for painting 3D models or something akin to that. They didn't really have the place to put it or really sell the code to, so they basically made a game around it. Yep, that's pretty much how it happened. Rebel Galaxy Outlaws, ladies and gentlemen. Still, the game itself is a bit too arcadey, and it is reflected in the reviews, but fuck you idiots, the music and characters sold me alone. And the fucking Photoshop spaceship thing, that's great in my book. On the other hand, Outer Wilds was criticized at the time for being one of the first to take the Epic exclusive deal, you know, when Epic Store was flaunting its money and tried to compete with Steam. But the game itself, well, it's less of a space game even, and more of an experimental, weird artsy-fartsy puzzle type. Personally, I'm yet to sink my teeth into it myself, though it is one of those artsy-fartsy experiences that, you know, sometimes I do like to enjoy, and it certainly has some really cool technical tricks up its sleeve, making it worth checking out. So, it's a good game for sure. And the third biggest profile game that released that year was Star Wars Squadrons, a game that aimed to replicate the long-since dead X-Wing and TIE Fighter glory with modern tech and graphics, and to a certain degree, they succeeded! After Battlefront and EA's mishandling bullshit, as well as Star Wars simply sucking big penis on the big screen, we expected very little. But it ended up being genuinely positive and fun experience. No microtransactions, just cosmetic unlocks for playing the game as rewards. It was unbelievable, and from EA, no less. Sadly, there wasn't much of a story for this game. As it released, few updates and patches later, that was about it. And then the developer was moved by EA to do some other crimes. Actually, come to think of it, hold on, what did they else do? Let's see, oh, they remade Dead Space? Also a decent game without any bullshit? Oh, and now they're working on some Iron Man game, okay, whatever, who cares, and a Battlefield game. Hey, you know what, I kinda start to like these guys. Well, good on you, don't make any exploitative crap and I'll be rooting for you. But back to Squadrons. While it is sad that there won't be any further updates or content, this goes into the books as a good game with no bad things. While not as impactful or important as the original TIE Fighter, it's just an unabashed good stuff. No, you know what? No, it's great! You know, I was a fan of Redout. For today's market, it was a rare anti-gravity racer. When they announced Space Assault, I thought, well, okay, well, they're making a wild jump into the space combat games. I mean, okay, cool. Then, it released. Jesus fucking Christ. Fuck me. It's an on-the-rails abomination that I know the developer 34 Big Things could do better than, but they didn't. A mobile game abomination slopped out onto the PC, seemingly to, I don't know, cash in or something? Well, whatever the reason was, I know that this piece of crap should have never been made. Well, at least thank fuck the Redout 2 is not bad that released just recently, so let's just chalk this up to a lapse in judgment after 10th bottle of Jägermeister.
Let's see if my old signature will do the trick.
Looks like you've gone and stolen yourself a doctor.
With the success of Everspace, Rockfish decided to go early access and go bigger. Out the window was roguelike mode and in was the open world, and hot fucking damn, it's great! Seriously, when I first saw the very first early access build, I had to double check as it looked like a finished game. And that's how diligently developers took the making of the sequel. Yes, the game still is a space arcadey combat game, but in an open world with missions and very minor trading, it's kinda like Rebel Galaxy Outlaws. But still, goddamn is it good. Sure, the UI screams, we just copied Destiny's UI. But for all the things that you could nitpick, everything works and is designed to be fun. Within the 2 years, the game was released in full with a lot of good content and a decent story. It is a cool game and I can't really truly be more happier for their success. And you know what? It doesn't have any bullshit exploitation or always online either. Hell, the game has a fucking demo. This is a great game.
This is civilian vessel Salu, broadcasting on all emergency frequencies.
Cleansing doctrine.
Our engines are down. Somebody help us!
Hold on, Salu. Evade! Evade!
Please, our families!
Forza, target ahead.
Engaged. Direct hit. The reactor is unstable.
Too late.
And then there was Chorus, this overbloated cinematic AAA wannabe basic bitch arcadey space combat game. And that's really what the game is, visually sparing absolutely no expense, trying to look and feel as big as Ubisoft or EA's third-person cinematic masterpieces and whatnot else, all the while using most overplayed and banal style of gameplay, space arcade combat. Now, understand, there's nothing wrong with the space combat games, but sadly they are, well, overplayed and hard to make, special ever since basically 90s. See, Chorus is not a bad game, not by a long shot, nor is it mediocre, the visuals alone are a testament to that, but it's also kinda meh. It's a good game, but in the blandest possible way. It does have a demo and it does not sell any extra garbage. Well, okay, maybe one skin pack, but that's a far cry from being abusive. So, a good game, but nothing more. And you know, funnily enough, the developer, Fish Labs, went to help Valheim developers port the game to Xbox. So, they're doing well already, nobody's gonna cry over this one. But where would space sim genre be without passion projects and hardcore nerds? Case in point, Earth Analogue. A programmer basically flexing their graphics coding and shader mastery the game. Gameplay wise, it's pretty bad. Bad controls, nothing burger, everything else, but the technical scale, well now that is a marvel. So interesting tier it is with you. Remember Oolite? The case where fans got pissed off so hard that they recreated the game with modern features, code and graphics, and then put it in open source? Here's another game that Elite managed to spawn almost as a kind of a spite project. Well, anyways, Fly Dangerous. This is the rare space sim where it's neither a true space sim, nor a space combat game, nor a space flight simulator. Welcome to the only entry into the subtype of space racing games. And I utterly love this project. It literally is a Truckmania but with Elite Dangerous and Star Citizen's heavy inspiration. I mean, hey, it's named after Elite Dangerous after all, while using Star Citizen style controls. And the game works, and it works really well. Developed by mainly one person, don't expect much of a graphical quality or fidelity, but when it comes to precision of controls and functionality, oh well, now then, it is up there with the big projects. The only other game that has space sim racing kind of worthy of note is Star Citizen, and even in that case it's sort of a mini game and only that. So, for the time being, Fly Dangerous is navigating undiscovered country, and what a first entry it is. S tier, no question. So hey, you know what's a genius idea? Attempt to copy-paste Space Engineers, but add persistent world with plots of land that would permanently retain the stuff built on them, and they would belong to individual players. Okay, cool. Then, poorly implement mechanics, fuck the optimization, and and call it a finished game. Yeah. Oh, and on top of that shit cake, make it a subscription-based game. Yeah! Oh, and for good measure, act like complete assholes when you, the developer, forget to lock off the developer-based buildings like, oh, I don't know, a store, and decide to later down the line ban players who found that you didn't lock the building. And of course, naturally, looted it. So yeah, that happened. So yeah, safe to say that I'm greatly displeased by Dual Universe, and most of all, its French developers. But even without that, a subscription is a hard sell, let alone a game that, well, kinda barely works. Oh, and look at that, no wonder no one's playing it. Case and point, pure trash. The long-awaited sequel to Kerbal Space program was finally released in early access. Yeah, I think you know where this is going already. On the first glance, it was like most other early access titles, but very soon the sentiment started to turn. Now, original developers, Squad, gets bought out by 2K, oh no, but you know, they continue work on the Kerbal 1, and first news of sequel starts popping up a while back. Okay, now behind the closed doors, development studio is found to continue Squad's work on Kerbal Space Program 2, but they flake out or were fucking up, or were fucking about. I don't know what the hell was Startier really trying to do, but it was kind of interesting, I guess. In any case, 2K poaches a bunch of developers from Startier and made Intercept Games to continue development on Kerbal Space Program 2. Then it releases. It has less features than expected and quality is pretty bad. But hey, there are glimpses that it will be better, right? Hell, there's a roadmap. That's reassuring, right? Well, people are not convinced. Negative reviews and rock-bottoming player counts for Kerbal 2 that affect even the first game's player count quickly follow. I shit you not. Yep, the stank of Kerbal 2 failure caused the Kerbal 1 to lose players as well. That's how shit it went. After about a year, the first big update releases. It's mildly positive uptick. Not enough to satisfy people, but it's a positive. Then skip a few weeks and 2K decides to close down a lot of its indie publishing arms, private division studios, including Intercept Games. Oh no! Yeah, at this point it's unclear what will happen with Kerbal Space Program 2, but looking at developers who worked on it, well, they ain't working on it anymore. God damn it. Now I'm laughing, but it really is a bizarre circumstance of weird stuff, generally speaking. Now the writing on the wall is clear, the game is dead. And of course, if you want to learn a little bit more about what the hell happened or how did we arrive in this bizarre situation, Shadow Zone, my fellow creator, had made a wonderful piece on this very topic, so go check him out. And you know, more than any project, this one hurts the most, going from a S-tier super important impact of Kerbal 1 to literally trash, pure trash tier dumpster fire that is the bizarre failure of Kerbal Space Program 2. And at this point, the only good thing that could happen is maybe 2K refunding everyone. But let's be frank, they won't, because they're kind Hey! And we finish this massive list with the biggest disappointment of the last decade, Starfield. Now I already covered it in my 3-hour hypercritical review, so go check it out for my in-depth thoughts, but to summarize. At best, it's a very bland game, even for the normies and casuals. For space sim fans, the game is a mockery, where you can't even land manually on a planet. Instead, it's a loading screen. In space, there is combat with a spaceship, which is arcadey as fuck, which is fine, but there is nothing else to do. Besides, traveling from point to point with a spaceship is a loading screen again, so your ship literally is just a teleporting house and nothing else. While everything else is also a loading screen. I mean, sure, yeah, there's also a spaceship building, which is a cool feature, but Avorion already had that, and honestly speaking, it's a lot more interesting because you could do more with it. But in Starfield? Nah, it's just a teleporting house. Also, it's rather poorly optimized, very boring game design, and at first it might look like a mediocre game, but it really is a very bad game once you turn on your brain, even for a little bit, be that on story, combat, game design, writing, anything. See, I came into Starfield thinking that, well, okay, hey, Bethesda have been assholes in the last little while and with the shit design, but at least they can make really interesting open worlds, and they easily appeal to the normies. And so, if I lobotomize myself, I could enjoy it too. Nope! Not even a Skyrim or Fallout level interesting open world is there for me. It's just loading screens and shit story with piss poor level scaling combat design, with yet another collectathon. This truly is a crap tier game, true and true.
Because the true mark of being a real developer is, as every developer knows, is waiting for reviews to come in, right? And then reading the reviews, of course, and hopefully, if you get lucky, ignoring the reviews, right? Thank you very much, guys.
And so, that's my list. Now, obviously, I excluded a few things and included some weird choices, perhaps like FTL. But the exclusion-wise, well, Star Trek, for example, did get absolutely no mention. Mostly because a lot of that is crap. And also, there were games between the years of 2006 and 2011 completely ignored. Reason for that is that that was our true dark age, and there weren't any particularly good examples. I mean, X already was kind of the best series we got at that time. But regardless, point is, this, generally speaking, is my list. You know, subjective stuff. So if you disagree with it, well, fuck you. And also, maybe put in a bit more effort. Make your own list. Or, oh hell, maybe be a bit lazier and do a response or something like that. Regardless, be creative. Show your work and let's have a dialogue, I guess. Other than that, well, I did exclude a few, well, quite a lot of early access titles because I'll let them stew. Because if I were to evaluate them, judge them now, it would kind of hurt pretty much all of them. Because, well, obviously they haven't released, and most of them are half-baked. Release a fucking game, then I'll judge it. There are exceptions, obviously, in the list that I mentioned, like, for example, the biggest one is Star Citizen, but, you know, it is there for a big reason. Well, regardless, as always, subscribe, follow, and check out the Patreon. For now, I'll bid you adieu, and live long and force prosper. Basically, don't release garbage games. Okay, this genre is already filled with titles. Oh, and those of you wondering about Star Atlas, just crypto garbage. Absolutely no.